Hey guys, what's happening? Today's class is going to be about pistons. We're going to have a little discussion about pistons, about different types of materials, different types of tops on them, how to put rings on them, and we're going to wind up doing a piston install in a small block Chevy. Alright, so let's get the good camera angle. Okay, so I got three different pistons on my bench today. I have this one right here. This is going in our small block Chevy. Now, it has an arrow on it that faces forward that you guys learned. That's how the piston has to get orientated into the motor, that this got to be facing the front of the engine. These are called valve reliefs. It's got a part number on it, and it's got a .030 because this is for an engine that's been bored 30 over. All right. The other thing, this already has its rings on it. It's got two compression rings. They're called chromoly, and it's got a three-piece oil ring. Other parts of the piston that are pretty important to know about is this is called the skirt. A lot of wear happens on the skirt. I can actually see some scratches on this one. And it's also important about the lands. Like, you know, I'm standing on lands. I've seen a lot of these lands break and crack on turbocharged cars that were not tuned properly. Detonation caused them to crack. It is a common failure part. Right here where the piston is connected to the connecting rod is called a wrist pin. This one particular one is pressed. Has to go on a press and be pressed into the small end. I'll show you another piston. If you look at this one, it's got a retaining clip in it. It's called a floating type piston. Now, if you look at the tops of these, this is for a 350 Chevy. This is for a 454. This is called flat top, and this one is called domed. This one will give a lot more compression. You can see that the valve reliefs are a lot bigger for bigger valves. But got a really good look at our lands. And this one actually has like a little bit of Teflon on the skirt to help with friction. The other thing I've done to these rods is I put aftermarket bolts in them. ARP bolts makes them a little bit stronger. This connecting rod here, I believe, is either from Scat or Eagle. It's also got a stronger connecting rod bolt. Very common for this area is the failure spot. Very rare have I seen rods crack in half, but it does happen. But usually what happens is the bolts break. It gets worn so much here, people just drive around with a rod knock until it just knocks the cap off, breaks the bolt off, gets fatigued over time. If you ever hear the term of a spun bearing, this bearing that I have in here actually spins in its groove, causes all kinds of havoc. Now this other piston I have laying here is out of a Chevy V6. And I wanted to give it because it's actually cut deeper. It's called dished. Got four reliefs, but dished. Low compression, regular pump gas compression, flat top, and then we have domed, which would probably require racing fuel, high octane fuel. All right, so what we're going to wind up doing today is we're going to wind up putting a ring on this piston. So start off with our oil ring. Oil ring is actually three rings. It's a cage and two oil scraper rings. So the first thing I wind up putting on is my cage. And I just spiral it on there. Try not to stretch it. There are tools that are made for putting rings on. I'm not a big fan of them. They tend to, I feel, stretch the ring out a little bit. Now what I got to figure out is where it's split at. So I got it split right there in the center of my skirt. Now when I put this ring on, I want this gap to be lined up right in this corner. I'm going to do the top of the oil ring first. And I'm just going to spiral it into place, and I'm going to watch when I go down the side that I don't gouge the side of the piston up. I'm lifting a little bit and I'm placing it in its spot. I don't want the ring grooves lined up. That can cause oiling problems and compression problems. Now on this side I'm going to put it right here. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to spiral it into place. get it to drop in. And then when it's in, it should all move as like one piece, which it does. All right, so my oil ring is in. Now, when we look in this box, when you get a box of rings, on the tab, there's usually some writing. So this compression ring here is for my top groove, and this one is for my second groove. Now, sometimes they will also have dots on them, and the dots tell you if they go facing the top of the piston. So we're going to look closely at this ring, and it's got a groove on it. It's got an inner groove. Now sometimes these come with an installation sheet that tells you which way that's got to go. And as of right now, I'm trying to find it. See what they have as far as instructions in here. Most common second ring styles. So we have a groove on the inside, which is probably that one, and it wants it facing down. It says that there should be a dot. I am not seeing a dot, but I am going to go by what they say is that that groove should be facing downward. So that's what we're going to wind up doing. So I'm going to take my ring, and now I'm going to have to work it into its spot. So I'm getting it started. And just like I did with the oil ring, I'm going to pull a little bit here so I don't get it caught in that ring groove. And I got it in my spot. Alright, so now let's go take a look at the top compression ring. So this one says top rings. We'll look for a dot on it. We have a dot. Dot's got to be facing up. Okay, I'm spiraling it on. And now when I line up these ring grooves, I want to have one on this side of the wrist pin and then one on this side of the wrist pin. That's where like the least amount of rocking is going to go on. It's going to be kind of steady. You might get some piston slaps side to side. It's one of my preferences. I like to put them lined up with the wrist pin. And that's how you put rings on. Real simple stuff. Alright guys, I'll be part 2 when we start installing a piston. Alright guys, here we go. We're going to install piston number 2 on this engine. One of the first things I need to do is I'm going to lubricate my skirt. I wind up putting a little bit of oil on my skirt. Make it slide into the cylinder hole a little easier. So I lube up my skirt on both sides. I'm going to wind up using my piston compression tool. Now, I want the lower strap, see how there's like a 1-inch gap here and there's like only like a 1/4 inch gap? I want the 1/4 inch gap side facing the bottom of the skirt. So it's got to go on here, like that. We don't want this end on because it would make it not compress fully. Got to think of this as like a funnel that it goes from large to small. So I got to tighten this up on it. Let me double check my rings first though. I want to make sure that I have a compression ring. My bottom second ring I want lined up with my wrist pin, and then my top one with the wrist pin on the other side, 180 degrees from each other. Tighten my tool as much as I possibly can. I want a little bit of skirt showing out the bottom to guide me into the hole. Next thing I have to do is I have to remove my cap. And I got to wind up putting a couple of hoses on it to protect the crankshaft. Sometimes these are tricky getting off. They get cocked. You just got to wiggle them. Make sure my bearing's pushed in all the way. I'm going to wind up putting my hoses on here to protect the crankshaft, that it doesn't ding anything. Alright, next step, I want to lube the cylinder wall. Put a little oil in here. It's good to have a pair of gloves on. Makes things a lot easier. Not so worried about getting grease and oil all over yourself. The other thing I want to make sure is that my arrow is facing forward. The cap I took off had the number 2 on it. And then I just double checked my chamfer, that my chamfer right here is going to wind up facing the crank side, because there's a rod to rod side. This is going to be the rod to rod side. All right, I'm going to give it another tweak. Get a little tighter. All right, she's tight. Now I need my hammer. I like using a soft end of a hammer. That's not going to put any dings into my piston. But what I want to make sure I do is that when I'm installing this, I tap it down nice and tight against the deck of the block, and I have my hand holding it so it doesn't bounce and destroy the ring. I feel a quarter ring. I got to redo it. All right, so now we're going to go for it the second time. Now, you ever feel like something's not right? Just don't send it and be like, okay, it'll be fine. It won't be fine. You'll have a big mistake and will cost you thousands of dollars. So you always want to make sure everything's right, everything's clean. And if it feels like it's jamming up, you just take it apart and do it again. All right, that time it went in nice and perfect. Okay, so now we gotta wind up connecting the connecting rod cap to the other end of the block. So I gotta spin my block around. All right, so I got my hoses here. Hopefully you guys can see. And I'm going to take some assembly lube. I already put a little bit on it, but I'll just show you. I put a little bit of STP oil treatment, very thick. I want to just use this on the bearings. I don't want to use this on the cylinder walls. It would be too thick. It would make it too stiff. We just don't want an oil that's going to wipe away while we're cranking it. We want to make sure that we have lubrication there for when we first start this motor up, that it's not a dry start and do damage to the bearings. Alright, so I got my rod all the way up. I'm going to pull my hoses off. Didn't make any nicks. Everything looks good. Now I got to put my connecting rod cap on the right way. So if you can see, there's a little notch right there. We want to make sure that it lines up with the side that has the notch. If you can't figure that out, always go by the chamfer towards the crank. A little crooked, I want to tap it with my rubber hammer a little bit. Alright. Put my rod bolts on. Like I said in my last video, that these are special rods. They're made from stronger material. The rod bolts are too. Less likely to break if you're making big power. Now I looked them up on Google and in a book, and the torque spec on these are 45 foot-pounds. All right. So what I want to do is I want to not just tighten one side down. I want to kind of walk it down in place. I want to make both sides snug. I don't want to put the cap on and have it cocked or crooked. So that side's snug. I'm going to make sure I got this side snug. You try to tighten these crooked, you could stretch the bolts. You could do all kinds of things that would make it come apart while it was running. So I'm going to pull this until it clicks. I got my 45 on that. 45 on that. Now then I always double check. 45. 45. And then I always make sure that my motor spins and I don't have any binding going on. So I turn my motor. Feel no binding whatsoever. Feels awesome. Alright guys, till the next video.